Okay, welcome everybody for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Debbie Chalice and I work at LSE Library. This is a webinar, which means we can't see you, but we're very grateful that you're here with us tonight, both here on Zoom webinar and on Facebook Live through the LSE Library site. I'm moderating this event on behalf of the LSE, and my colleague Maria Bell is going to be putting in the chat to all attendees shortly. If you want to tweet or Insta this event, please use the hashtag LSE Jackie Collins. That's hashtag LSE Jackie Collins. So I'm basically just going to do a little bit of an introduction before I hand over to our host, Naomi Paxton, who's here with us tonight. The Women's Library has been at LSE since 2012. It has its origins in the start of the original suffrage movement in the UK in the mid-19th century. Our collection tells the story of the campaign for women's rights and women's equality from the beginnings of the suffrage movement to the present day. It includes UNESCO recognised documents, rare books and objects such as an original suffrage banners. Alongside our archive material, we also have a book library, which, though literary and historical in focus, does have a biography of Jackie Collins. Our interest in co-hosting this event with Modern Films, Simon Schuster and bookshop.org is to look back at Jackie Collins and her impact on publishing, women's writing and reading, and how much her books pioneered accounts of women's fantasies around sex and power. We are still having conversations around sexual agency, consent and so-called slut shaming today. The new film, the new film, let's get this right, Lady Boss, the Jackie Collins story, shows how those conversations have been held through Jackie and her work since the 1970s. Whether it is Barbara Cartland denouncing her books as disgusting on Wogan, or the sort of backlash against the sort of power woman feminism that Collins seemed to exemplify in the 90s. So LSE Library is delighted to welcome our panelists to carry on those conversations tonight. And I'm pleased to hand over to Dr. Naomi Paxton, a writer and performer with an expertise in suffragist and feminist activism in theatre and popular entertainment, who's hosting this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Naomi Paxton. I'm really pleased to be here to welcome you, our audience to this event tonight, and our panelists to this very special Women's Library event. So we're joined for this Q&A to discuss the legacy of Jackie Collins' work, her impact on women's fiction, and the writers who picked up the torch, as well as the film. So with us tonight is Lady Boss's director, Laura Fairrie. So Laura has also worked on Spiral, a documentary charting the human cost of rising anti-Semitism and intolerance in Europe, and Battle for Barking, a documentary telling the story of Margaret Hodge MP's fight against the far-right BNP in the 2010 British election. Also joining us is Melanie Blake, a best-selling author, playwright, columnist, and legendary talent agent. So Melanie, having built up a star-studded agency of acting talent, is also a writer and producer with best-selling books, including Ruthless Women and The Thunder Girls. And our final panel member is Suzanne Baboneau, Managing Director of the Publishing Division at Simon & Schuster and Jackie Collins' editor of many years. So Simon & Schuster is the official publisher of Jackie Collins' books, which have sold tens of millions of copies in more than 40 countries, making Jackie one of the world's top-selling novelists. So after we have a discussion of about 30 to 40 minutes, there will be the chance for you to put your questions. So to submit your questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And questions will be submitted to myself and the panel, and we will answer as many as possible. And as Debbie said, please do, if you're Instagram or on Twitter, please do use the hashtag LSE Jackie Collins, and you can continue the conversation on social media after this event. If you haven't seen the film already, it is available to watch via the Women's Library and bookshop.org through the links in the event description. So let's kick off immediately, and I'm going to start with Laura Fairrie and the film. So let's start with the most obvious question, Laura. What inspired you to make this film?
Well, the film started because I was looking to make a film about a fabulous and inspiring woman, and I was talking to John Batsett, the producer, about this idea. I just want to make a film about a fabulous woman, and he, was kind of sort of said, wow, that's a real coincidence, because Jackie Collins' daughters have just contacted me, you know, what do you think about this idea? He didn't know much about her. And of course, I was just kind of immediately absolutely thrilled, because I used to read her books as a teenager at school, you know, hidden under the desk in maths lessons, and she was my sex education. So, and she was definitely the definition of fabulous. But really, that was the beginning of this project. Fabulous woman, my sex education, and what could we do with this? What was the sort of story behind the public persona that I knew, the Jackie Collins and the shoulder pads, the women on the back of the books.
So the family had an archive that they wanted to share that was Jackie's own archive, is that right?
Yeah, so Jackie's daughters had contacted John Batzek, you know, as he's, you know, the best producer in the business, to say, you know, we've got all this archive our mother left behind. We're so surprised that we found everything in these cupboards when she died. We don't know what to do with it. Is there a documentary here? So that's really kind of how it started. And, you know, so it was just kind of this wonderful combination of the sort of stars aligning and me going into this meeting with him. You know, we were looking to do another film together, but me sort of saying specifically, it has to be a fabulous woman, John. And he was like, well, Jackie Collins, isn't she fabulous? Like, yes,
absolutely. And what an amazing resource to have. So how has Jackie Collins' writing spoken to you differently at different ages? So when you first encountered it as a teenager as part of your sex education, when you're doing research for the film, and then now thinking about it, you know, having seen the audience's responses to the film, how have you encountered her work differently over that period of time?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, of course, you know, as a teenager, age 13, 14, 15, you know, my relationship with her books was completely different to returning to them, you know, in the last few years in order to make the film. You know, so then it was, you know, very much they were handed around. We were, you know, looking through the pages for particular scenes. You know, they were definitely, you know, an education, an eye-opener, you know, a source of shock, a source of kind of, you know, knowledge that we hadn't known was out there, but also just great stories, you know. But what was wonderful about returning to her books just in order to make this film was that obviously as an older woman with more life experience, I was reading them, you know, with that in mind, but also I was just so surprised about what I discovered, the depth in the books actually, and how political they are, and how much of her own life and her own harsh and difficult experiences are in those books. You know, of course, there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of glamour, there's a lot of, you know, wonderful characters and brilliant, you know, page-turning storytelling, but there's also some real darkness in there, and there's a lot of her own life experiences we're hidden within her stories, and that I found really fascinating.
I mean, there must have been so much there and so many directions you could have taken the film in, so much of the story to tell. Is there anything that you wish you could have included but would have perhaps taken the narrative in a different direction, or is there a much longer director's cut, a sort of 7-hour version where you filmed everything you wanted to film?
Well, of course, I mean, at one point there was a sort of 7-hour version, yeah. But no, I was always kind of very clear that it was, you know, it was kind of a feminist fairy tale that I was looking at here, and also that, you know, that the heart of it had to be the public persona and the suit of armor that she created in order to survive in a man's world and to do what she needed to do. But then the private story behind that, and I really wanted to look at the untold private story and make her, you know, show that that was a universal story, make people feel that they could connect with her, and really reveal her vulnerability, and, you know, the fact that she was a woman like all of us, dealing with all the blows that life can throw at you. And so I just love the juxtaposition between those two things. So I was very clear that that's definitely what the film is centering around, and that did allow me to let go of a lot of other wonderful material, but, you know, it just couldn't all get in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that comes across really clearly, and it's very moving on both counts. I was going to say, Suzanne, can I come to you? Yes. As Jackie's editor? What did the genre of women's fiction look like at the time Jackie embarked on her writing career professionally? What was being published, and what did Jackie do differently?
Before I answer that, I just want to say, Laura, the film is absolutely amazing, and I am, because I've known Jackie, or knew Jackie for nearly 40 years. And I remember when Laura came in to the office in Gray's Inn Road. So we're not far from the LSE. So Jackie was never very far away from you. And you talked, it was just sort of, you know, shoots in your mind, little shoots springing up. And you know, I hope we were helpful in some way, but it's quite hard, I think, to translate a writer's life onto the screen. And curiously, when I came back from seeing the premiere 2 weeks ago, my husband had he said, I've just watched the most amazing 2 hours of documentary. I said, what is that? He said, the Ernest Hemingway, you know, 6 hour that's on BBC Two, the Ken Burns. And I loved that he was watching that with the thing, and then Jackie. And I thought that's, you know, two kind of legendary thing. Anyway, so I just wanted to say, you have done Jackie proud, and
thank you so much.
It really was. So to go back to your question, Naomi, I started in publishing in 1980, so I'm slightly betraying my age. So that was, and I started Pan Books, and that was very much the era of the blockbusters, the big gold foil airport bestsellers, gold foil, you know, big type on the jacket, big spines. And I guess in some ways the forerunners or the peers of Jackie were authors like Judith Krantz with Scruples, which was published in 1978. And that was very kind of glamorous, affluent world, etc. And Judith was published by Transworld, and she was one of the first authors to go on tour, you know, on a kind of publicity tour. And then you had Jacqueline Suzanne with Valley of the Dolls, which was 1966. So that's going back a bit. But again, you know, a kind of one character rags to riches, one character Hollywood superstar. So women. Closer to home, I'm remembering Barbara Taylor Bradford with A Woman of Substance, very much rags to riches, but, you know, a woman of substance. And I remember Barbara Taylor Bradford, bless her, wrote one of the introductions to our new reissues of Jackie's work. And she and I met at the Dorchester for tea. It must have been a good 2 years ago now. And that's where Jackie used to stay. And she knew Jackie. And we just had this wonderful conversation. There is Barbara in there. And then again, Shirley Conran, Lace. Who could forget Lace, which was 1982. Lace 2, Savages. I became Shirley's editor latterly, etc. And then Jilly Cooper, I would say, with Polo Riders, Rivals. So they were all women writing these big books, full of self-confidence, full of pride in what they were doing, and full of women being successful. And so there was Jackie. What did she do differently? She wrote a book a year, and I can't, underestimate what a difference that could make. She never missed a deadline. I mean, her deadlines were tight. We had very, little room but I knew how she worked, and we used to edit on the phone, and it was great. But she was a book a year. She also wrote, and I'm not saying the others didn't, because they did, but delivering a book a year, her plots, I think this is one of the things that people underestimate. Jackie wrote good plots. She wrote great women. She wrote great sex. She wrote this, but the plot, she had you turning the pages. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? She knew how to write chapters on a cliffhanger, etc. She knew her market. She really engaged with her market, both on the page and, again, going out on tour. She would come over every year and do the chat shows. And she was kind of, as I said, she was a very kind person, and she didn't look down on her readers. They were her, as it were. So there was a great, I think, a rapport. And in those days, you had no social media, so she couldn't connect with Twitter and Facebook, etc. She did latterly. But I think she just, when she was on the chat shows, whether it's Terry Wogan or whatever, and she was British, if I may say, she just, I think she took all of us with her to Beverly Hills and gave us, she said, come with me. I'm going to show you what it's like. And she kept that kind of, she was part of, but she was apart from. So, there was an alchemy there. It's impossible to kind of articulate, but, she knew what she was doing, but she was doing it from the heart and not from the head. She was writing to a formula, but it was a heartfelt formula. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. I think we can see that in the film, that engagement with the readership, those queues of people waiting for the signings, and the number of people who say they're her best friend, and the kind of personal encounters, and that interview, that branding, I suppose, and including the armour, as you were talking about, Laura, the look as well, the kind of professional author look in this case. It's just, Suzanne, you work with lots of very successful people. How important is selling the author as well as the book? So how important is selling that story of her as our conduit into that world, as well as the book in the industry? Because I think in the film we talk about, or certainly people talk about how the fact that she was really so involved in the marketing and branding of her books was a really important part of her success.
Yeah, she was very, very involved. And which actually in Jackie's case was a blessing. It can be a tricky thing, but it was, you know, because as I say, she knew her market. It's as important, it was as important then as is now. Obviously, the world has changed entirely because of social media. And we're talking about Jackie writing the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And she, you know, she would come to London, she would go to South Africa, she would go to Australia, she would go to visit her translation, and she would meet everybody on a very kind of level footing. And I think, you know, she knew about promotion. I remember we used to get in a little bit of a wrangle because she wanted to, you know, remember, I mean, they still do, but big tube posters, buses, you know, the bus campaigns, ad shells. She wanted to be, she wanted it to be all her whole, you know, full face photograph, etc. And we used to say, Jackie, we have to have the book as well, a pack shot. And I always remember we would take big ads on those bus sides. And there was one terrible moment when they, you know, they have to sort of fasten them with rivets or something. And one went right through her face, her forehead. And that was a little difficult. But she was great, but she knew her brand. She knew how to kind of engage. I'm worried. Can you hear me? My internet's a little dodgy. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Please tell me if it's not. So, and then of course, when social media kicked in, she was aware that she had a lot to learn. And she engaged a social media kind of expert. She also talked to her, you know, she introduced a whole different generation of characters in her books. So Lucky's daughters and sons. And that was what was lovely. She had them, she kind of engaged with them. She understood, she wasn't trying to sort of manufacture it. She really tried to understand what made them tick. She was a good listener.
Ting, a very good listener. Just thinking about you editing books over the phone there, were there ever parts of her books that were too close to the truth or too revealing or shocking to be published? I'm just curious because I've got her in the film taking photos and, you know, making notes.
I can't recall any, but I do remember, I mean, it was actually before my time in publishing. Her very first novel, World is Full of Married Men, was banned in actually a number of her early books were banned in South Africa. And that one was banned in Australia and New Zealand because she used 4-letter words. So she said, okay, I'll just take them out, but they still banned it. But I think she got away with a lot. I think she pushed the boundaries quite far, but she knew how far. I think the thing about Jackie, none of it was kind of gratuitous. You know, she wasn't writing gratuitous sex just for the kicks of it, just for the hell of it. It was part of the fabric of her characters, of how they were. I think that's what somehow kind of worked. So I can't, disappointingly, I can't remember, you know, any kind of outtakes we'd have to work on.
Oh, thank you. So talking about pushing boundaries, Melanie, if I can come to you, you said that Jackie Collins changed your destiny. Tell us more about that.
Well, first and foremost, I'm so thrilled to be here with you ladies. And Suzanne, just listening to that list of authors is like looking back at my early life, and because they were my education and nobody more so than Jackie. So I'm probably the example of everything that I think that she stood for and what she was selling, which was inspiration, that you could change your life and that girls could do anything, because I was from the wrong side of the tracks, poor family, bad education, no prospects on paper, nothing was going to change. My mum was pregnant at 16, in an unhappy marriage at 18, council life, that was kind of it for us. And you talk about the buses and the fact that she liked her image strong and present. And I was actually 12 years old in a library when I discovered, I was walking past like the young adult section, and I saw this amazing looking woman. I'd never seen anything quite like her. And someone had placed a copy of her book backwards on a shelf. And I was just drawn to her like a moth to a flame. And I turned it around and it was Rockstar. And I sat on one of the little toadstools in like the children's area, which is quite hilarious, really. You know, they used to have those little areas in library. They probably still do. But and I just devoured it. And I must have been like the age of 13. And I was literally reading it. My mum was a cleaner. We had a really, you know, she was in a violent relationship. Like there was no hope. And suddenly in these pages, these amazing women that, and bearing in mind this was the 80s and 90s, and there was a lot of women back then that were famous for being married to men, or they were taking their clothes off because they were models, or they were like the zeitgeist. These women in the Jackie books that I was reading were lady bosses. They were in control. They were from the wrong side of the tracks, but willing to fight to get whatever it took, and would take revenge and would take actually anything that was thrown at them and come back at it. And I literally sat there, and I remember I went to take the book out, and the librarian was like much older because I was so young, and she said, "This isn't for you, is it?" And I looked at her and she looked at me, and I went, "No." And she went, "Okay." And she kind of knew it was, and it was. And I used to take it with me on my mum's cleaning round. And my mum didn't really look at what I was reading. I would watch my mum scrubbing the floor with her hands and knees, literally her knees bleeding. And I would be looking in the book, and I would look at my mum with no judgment on my mum, but my mum was not happy. And her life wasn't happy. And I would look in this book, and I literally went, okay, this is what I want. This is the life that I want. And these books are going to show me. So I took her books. I then devoured every book that I could find, and many of the other ones, Suzanne, that you mentioned, I mean, Lace and so on, Shirley Conran, I love. And I'd learned that the message for me was that, again, the one that Jackie actually repeated in her real life, but was throughout the pages of the book, Laura, which you will know, was that girls could do anything. They could be bosses in the bedroom and in the boardroom. And if I hadn't have read those books, I certainly wouldn't. So I left school at 16 with no qualifications, dyslexic, on a hiding to nowhere. And I built a talent agency that turned over £30 million, became an ultimate lady boss, and then became a best-selling author. And without Jackie Collins, that wouldn't have happened. So I love to think, when I watched the movie, that when her daughters, who I just thought was so amazingly grounded, and it showed what an amazing woman that she must have been to have created that motherhood that raised those girls, because they were just I didn't really know much about her daughters until I watched the movie, and I just would never have expected Jackie Collins' daughters to be quite frankly that level and normal. You just imagine these Hollywood children, obviously because she wrote Hollywood Kids and so on, and I thought, God, there are so many layers to her that I wasn't aware of, but the actual image that she sold worked because it got me to where I was. So that she was saying, Suzanne, everything was authentic, but even though it was souped up, Laura, it was still her, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. She was just so brilliant at you know, she had this fantasy idea of what it was to be a strong woman, and she obviously channeled that into her characters, but she also channeled that into herself and her own life. Yeah. And so it's just this wonderful sort of mirror image of the characters in the books and the life that Jackie lived, or the life that she thought that she wanted to live and that she chased after. And of course, you know, it wasn't always perfect. And, you know, as the film shows, she got tripped up along the way. But
of course, yeah,
she used her Jackie Collins persona and this idea of what she thought was a strong woman in order to survive in her own life.
I took from her that in my book, Ruthless Women, we have a phrase where they go, she uses her invisible shoulder pads. Like literally, and we take that from Jackie, like with this imagination that suddenly you just grow taller with the pads and the heels and the jewels and the power. And then they get through whatever the scene is. They might fall apart later, as we saw in the movie, that there were so many areas of her life that weren't perfect, but that the goal would still be met. The message would still be clear. It was that you could do anything, and that a woman could end up on top in every way. And when we talk about the sex education side of it, I really feel that, again, I don't think I would have had the confidence as a woman growing up to make some of the sexual choices that I would have made, to say no to things that I didn't want to do, or to not participate in relationships that I wasn't keen on, had I not have read such strong female heroines. So I think that there's a whole nation, and you will know this, Laura, from the feedback you're getting from the movie, of women that definitely, like you opened with me, Naomi, about the fact that I say that she changed my destiny, that she did change their destiny because we learned to say no, and we learned to say no, it's not good enough, and we learned that from Jackie Collins. And if that's not feminism, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I'll talk about that feminism later, but it's interesting about the sexual agency. I was just going to ask Melanie, how do you tackle female sexuality as a writer? Do you feel a sort of pressure or responsibility to kind of pass on that lesson to your readers, to represent kind of positive female role models? Sorry.
So absolutely. So I have a book out at the moment which is called Ruthless Women, which is about 7 females who are all kind of over 50, which is quite unusual these days. And in the book, there's quite a lot of sex. I wrote it in lockdown last year. I don't normally write sexy books. It's a strange thing. I can't really explain it. All I can say, I was in lockdown alone. Maybe that's the reason. But in the book, not one of the women, not one sexual encounter, no one woman is taken advantage of by a man. Now, every woman is in control. She leads the way. She engineers, she steers, and it created a real storm, and it became a Sunday Times bestseller, and it's been translated into 5 different languages, and that hasn't happened to me before. And it was interesting because when I wrote my first book, The Thunder Girls, I'm not saying that I would choose, as you said, Suzanne, the sex wasn't there for no reason. Like, you know, my characters are real. So they do what they want, and that's what happened in this book. They just tended to want to have a lot of sex, but the sex was influenced by the fact that you could tell those stories. I mean, look at The Stud. It's from Fontaine's perspective the whole way through. I mean, literally, he's just a toy in that book, which had never been, I mean, I'd certainly never seen it before. If you go back to Jacqueline and Suzanne's Valley of the Dolls, which is one of my all-time favorite ones, the women are kind of victims in that book, which I still love it, but like, that's not you don't get a victim in a Jackie Collins book. You get a lady boss, and there's a difference and a shift. And again, if we take Lace as a reference, you know, one of my all-time favorites ever, only Lily is really the one with the power. The rest of them are kind of at her bidding. So I think Jackie's just so unique in the fact that you read those books, from the Hollywood wives that take the vengeance, to the girlfriends that are deciding to take over the studios, to Lucky that's deciding that she's going to have the entire empire. I don't think there's another female author that has had such strong women. So when I was writing Ruthless Women, when I'd written The Thunder Girls, a reviewer said to me, what you really need to do is to write a bonk buster. And I went, nobody does that anymore. Like, it's not what happened. And it turned out that that's what I wrote. And it's funny because obviously they called her books bonkbusters, blockbusters, and it gave me the biggest success that I'd had. But I still trace it all the way back to the inspiration of reading those characters and just thinking, God, women can really live those lives. And not only have I written about it, I've lived it. I've gone from cancer state to mansion, you know, and not quite back again, but around the block, you know. And it's like, you just think, where would I be if I hadn't have read her books? And now I see the feedback from my books and I go, are we carrying the torch? Are we passing it on? And the same goes for the movie, Laura. You know, when you get to watch that movie and you see that this woman, and God, obviously, Suzanne, you will know better than all of us, that life wasn't perfect, that everything wasn't her roses, and it wasn't the way that it should have been, and yet still she carried on. I mean, the way I met her at Loose Women just at the very end, and I knew, and yet there she was it 9 days before she died? And I looked at her from across the studio floor and thought, you are never going to be repeated. There'll never be another you, ever. And I think authors like me, and anybody else, and you'll have a list, Suzanne, anyone that can continue in that strong female vein, I think is keeping her alive, as are you, Laura, with the movie.
Thank you so much. I was thinking about the your kind of demographic, because obviously you're a huge expert in marketing and branding anyway, of representing people, and then you are obviously representing yourself.
Yeah.
How do you target the demographic you're looking for through the branding and marketing of your own work? How involved are you in that process, because you're such an expert in that? So, is that something that you can, sorry, carry on.
No, I can answer it, because obviously I listened to Suzanne so deeply earlier. I basically, I went to the school of Jackie. I know exactly what to do. Like, I mean, tonight I'm wearing Jackie's pendant that I bought from the auction, which I wanted to buy because I thought she'd done such a great thing for me in my life to inspire me, that I thought I'm going to wear that pendant. And if I hadn't written a book at that time, because it's back in, is it 2017 or 15? I think the auction, I remember. I know she passed in 15, so it's about 18 months later. And I thought, if I ever do, because I always wanted to write, but because I was a very well-known agent for so many decades, I never really got the chance to do it. And when I did do it, I remember wearing the necklace to do it, and I had a very terrible heartbreak, and actually been abandoned at the altar, which is a bit like a novel story in itself. And I bought the necklace in the auction, and it was the strangest thing. I know Joan tells the story, Laura, you'll know this, about the flies, and she also tells the story about power cuts, and like they think there's a lot of supernatural Jackiness going on, don't they? She's still here. I don't know whether you know these stories, girls, but they've talked about it quite a lot. Anyway, I was bidding. I'd never done an online auction before. I'd never bidded on anything from unless it was eBay, and this was for Bonhams in LA, and I bid on this pendant, which you can see here.
I remember her wearing it, Melanie.
Here it is. And I was devastated. I was heartbroken. And FedEx is so amazing, not a fixing heartbreak, but at delivering things. And this arrived within 24 hours of me winning the auction. But when I put the bid on, there was a power cut and cracked chain, so I didn't know if I'd won it. And I went to bed, and I'm not afraid to say I'm a very strong woman, but this relationship nearly broke me, and I was in tears every night. And it arrived the next day, and I put it on, and I'm not particularly religious, and I went to bed that night, and I promise you, and I'm not even embarrassed to say this is true, I held this pendant like this. It was on a shorter chain, because I think she was more petite than me, so it's a bit higher up. And I said, when I was 13, you helped me escape what was going to be a really awful life, and I'm having a terrible time, and if you can hear me and you can do anything, can you just send me some of those shoulder pads and heels and that Ladybus vibes, because I need it. And long story short, in my life as a talent agent, the next day I was on set with a very famous client who was making a psychic show, and I couldn't get the pendant off because she was smaller than me, so it was stuck, and I was like, oh God. So I had a cardigan on that was literally covered up to here, so you couldn't see the pendant, all you could see was this chain. And this psychic came up to me on the floor and said, that chain you're wearing. And I went, right. She went, can I talk to you about it? And I went, yes. And I thought, I know this trick with psychics, don't tell them anything. And this piece hadn't been in the papers. There was nothing in the news about this piece. No one knew about this one at the time. And of course it arrived so quick. And she said, can I touch it? And I said, yeah. And she touched it. And she said, this belonged to a very powerful woman. And I went, right. And she said, and she wants you to know it's going to be okay. And I went, right. I mean, bear in mind, my heart was literally broken. I was like, I'd never been more unhappy. And I'm a strong woman. This was a bad time for me. And she said, and you've written something and it's in a cupboard and she wants you to get it out, and it got a bestseller. And I'd written Thunder Girls 20 years earlier, and no one had wanted to publish it because they said no one wants to read a book about older women. And I went home, I got it out, I dug it out, and within 3 months I'd sold it, and within a year it was a bestseller. So again, I know the fruit fly story in the movie. Anyone who hasn't watched it yet will see this. I'm not suggesting that, but I think she's here, and I don't think she's going anywhere.
An amazing story.
True story.
How fantastic. Yeah. How wonderful that she's been such an influence on you in life and after as well. How
I would not be on this panel with you ladies, and I'm so thrilled to be here. And everyone that reads any of my books without her, absolutely. And I would love to think that, Suzanne, that, you know, you probably still get fan mail through the office and all the rest of it, to think of the women that, you know, because we write for, well, I'm not putting myself in her league, but in her category, we write for the working classes, the masses, often the non-readers that are not catered for. And there's so much snobbery in the literary world that basically, you know, I mean, that still to this day, 29 publishers turned down Ruthless Women, and the 30th publisher published it. It went straight in at #4 in the Sunday Times bestseller. You know, sadly, I don't think that's changed. I think without her, we're in a much poorer place.
Suzanne, are there still taboos around content that specifically affect women writers in your experience and in your particular world at that level?
Just to pick up on what Melanie said, I completely agree. Jackie was, you know, writing very high in the 70s and 80s. And in the 90s, those who remember, it was turned over to the Argus saga and Joanna Trollope, etc. But Jackie transcended that and kept going and kept going. Oh, sorry, emails are popping in. Naomi, remind me your question, because I was slightly listening to Melanie and totally agreeing with her. And
I was yes. Well, I was thinking about the kind of that genre of who you're writing for, what your books are considered as, and if there are real taboos around content or women writers expressing themselves on the page in a certain way.
I think less so. I'm thinking out loud here, but I was thinking about, you know, 50 Shades of Grey, which again put the, you know, opened things up even more, and the huge success, E.L. James, and there were, you know, people who tried to write. Again, she was the real person. I mean, there were lots of E.L. James lookalikes. Some worked, some didn't, some kind of came and went, but she kept going, and has a new book out. And that was, you know, and I think, I'm going to say something. I haven't read, I did read 50 Shades of Grey, but I skimmed it on a beach in France, I remember now. I think, you know, that again, it brought a new generation of readers to it. I don't know whether the word taboo, of course it exists still, but I think people are breaking down barriers. But I think what Jackie did, she had a wide panorama, a wide cast of characters, a big setting. And then there was this, literally the Argus saga, much more about domestic minutiae, you know, which people kind of, you know, they could identify much more with, you know, talk about neighbors and everything. But Jackie just, you know, she just kept going and she kept her readers, etc. And in the same way, I think Joanna Trollope has transcended the Argus saga and is still writing and whatever. It's almost, I'm not saying there's only one person, but I remember, I mean, obviously when Jackie died, and there is that kind of slight knee-jerk reaction in publishing, you know, oh gosh, I wonder if she's left lots of, you know, unpublished novels under the bed, or there's lots of plot outlines. She hadn't. Is there somebody we should think about to write as Jackie Collins? You know, there are quite a lot of authors, you know, etc. And I remember thinking, I don't want this. She died, you know, at the end of her life. She, you know, commercially we could have made money, but it just felt so wrong. And we were thinking, was there someone who could write her memoir? And that's why I'm so grateful to Laura to actually keep that side and do it in that medium, Laura, because I thought Jackie was a writer to have the idea of somebody. Melanie, you could probably do it beautifully, but you're your own person, your own identity. So I think I'm going off the subject. I know, Naomi, but
that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think there was to be, you know, she'd never write to kind of offend or upset people. And I think that's what kind of kept people true to her. And that's why in the one, you know, that scene, Laura, in the film, the Robert Kilroy Silk moment, it didn't jar with, of course it jarred with me, because I thought, oh, but you know, everybody's entitled, and I think he, you know, it was, you know, you people need to have their say, but I kind of thought she just, you know, she didn't say very much, and I think by not saying very much and not being over defensive, she was actually kind of saying quite a lot. She was standing her ground, but she wasn't making them out to be, you know, I don't know, it just interested me in the same way, you know, that infamous Barbara Cartland moment, you know, she just, you know, she had a sense of humor. She had that
with grace.
twinkle in
Yeah,
her
it was
eye.
very moving, that really listening,
And Grace.
watching her listen, and really interested. Laura, do you want to speak to that scene and why you included that particularly? Oh, you're muted, Laura.
I'm just unmute myself, sorry. And I'm sorry, my 8-year-old son has just distracted me slightly, but and I'm just trying to ask him to not come in front of the camera. So the Robert Kilroy silk scene, yeah. So I mean, obviously there were lots of television appearances that Jackie went on with that were shocking, and there were lots of examples of her being subjected to either mostly male television hosts sneering at her or putting her down or slightly just kind of patronizing her, and her having to defend herself in only the most brilliantly charming way that she knew how. But that particular show was really shocking, and it just felt like almost like sort of her being sort of thrown at the stake, being pilloried, and people were throwing rotten vegetables at her or something. It was just so shocking the way the audience, just one after another, were just attacking her, and as the show moved through, you could just see her getting more and more upset and visibly uneasy. So, I felt it was really, really important to show that, because although it was one show, I do also think it was a very good example of how she felt in her life when she was criticized. And, going through her whole life, she was criticized in different ways by different people, but she had to, always pick herself up and carry on doing what she loved doing and what she believed in. And so I just thought it was really important to show that particular show, because it just spoke to so much, and was just very emotional as well to watch.
Absolutely, thank you. Please do ask questions on the Q&A. We've got some time for your questions, and in fact we've got one that I was just about to ask Laura as well. So Thomas says, Jackie never completed her autobiography. Are there any plans to publish a biography or to publish her incomplete work? I suppose that's a bit to Laura and also to Suzanne as well.
Well, Jackie's daughters, definitely have, they've got her autobiography. They've also got her teenage diaries, and they've, definitely been talking and thinking about what can they do with this, how could they make this into something. But the autobiography is really interesting, because obviously I've held these things in my hand, and had the actual real copies written in her own hand, and the autobiography is so unfinished, it's so incomplete, and it was just fascinating to me. Here's a woman that wrote 32 books in her life, that could write these stories and keep on doing that. But what she found really hard was writing her own story, was actually looking back at reality and looking back at the things that had happened to her, and she just found that in a way too painful to finish that. So I guess in answer to the question, yes, her daughters have thought about it, but then also, what do you do with that? What do you do with something that wasn't finished and that almost feels like she wasn't able to finish it for her own reasons?
I think you've done it in the movie.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. I think one of my biggest regrets is that we didn't sit down and say, Jackie, write your autobiography. I've read those pages, Laura. I think we're only up to age 12 or something, but they were there, and I loved the way you showed those pages on the screen. But I think and sometimes, as I say, when we lose somebody, of Jackie's stature, there is that immediate thing. So we've got to, keep going and keep her thing. And I think we had various ideas of people who could write her biography. And I think sometimes you just need to let time pass and just let things settle a little bit. Maybe, somebody will come along and with hindsight, but I think the film will carry, fly the flag for Jackie for quite some time.
Yeah, and there's a mini series as well, isn't there, coming based on the sisters together?
Yeah, there's a drama series, in the works.
Yeah.
And I think Universal have optioned the movie rights to 7 of the novels, haven't they?
Yeah, there's the Lucky Santangelo trilogy. Yeah.
So, I mean, she's not going anywhere.
Yeah, she's not going to drop out of the public consciousness in any way. Thank you. We've got a question from Tara here. When researching, so Laura, was there anything that surprised you about Jackie?
Oh, there's so much that surprised me. I mean, you know, my initial instincts as a filmmaker was, you know, what's the untold story? How can I turn the stereotype on its head? You know, how do you make people emotionally connect with the woman, the all-powerful woman in the leopard print shoulder pads? You know, so I knew that's what I was looking for, but of course I didn't know what I was going to actually find. And it was extraordinary to find, you know, the extent of her vulnerability, her lack of confidence. You know, the fact as well that she kind of almost, especially towards the end of her life, used her fantasy idea about what it was to be a strong woman, or the image that she created as Jackie Collins, really to kind of survive the blows. So there was so much in her story that I found surprising and fascinating as a filmmaker, and exciting, because I knew that there would be so many layers to this film and so many surprises and opportunities for people to connect emotionally with her, which is what I really wanted to do.
Suzanne, obviously you knew her very well. Did you learn anything from the film that surprised you or that was very unexpected?
I think it was more being reminded. I knew very little about her first marriage, to be honest. I knew that Wallace was Tracy's dad. I hadn't quite realized that they were so young and what she went through. Because when I got to know her, she was in this wonderful marriage, enduring marriage with Oscar. And it was very much Jackie and Oscar. And, you know, they adored each other. And it was, and she, so I think it was just seeing that. I think I agree completely, Melanie, about her daughters, who are so down to earth and delightful. Tracy actually lives quite near me. We go to the same gym. And she was, you know, she was a mum, really, and a mum and a grandmother. And I think it was just, I agree, Laura, completely about the vulnerability. You know, she had the big, I never really saw her. We never really saw her out. I mean, not wearing a trouser suit, you know, it was the trouser suit, different colors and the jewelry, etc. And I found it almost unbearably moving, the last scenes. We had just after the Loose Women, Melanie, it's probably that evening, we had what we would call a family dinner at Scott's, which was a tradition. Her agent, Laura, her colleague, was there, and our CEO, Ian Chapman, who also knew Jackie very, very well for a long time, and her agent. And we just had a family dinner, and Jackie loved, she loved coming back to London. I remember saying to her, I said to her that evening, do you, when you come back, feel like you're coming home? And she said, I absolutely do. You know, she loved the prawn and mayonnaise M&S sandwiches. She loved that Boots number 7, Protect and Perfect or whatever. She and I would always tuck into cauliflower cheese, you know, and I thought, she's not eating well. And I also was thinking about, so I'm going off the tangent again, but when I got the news a week or so later, I came in, we just published what turned out to be a final novel, The St. Angelos. And that was really bringing all of Lucky's family together, because Lucky's father, Gino, had died, and she brought everybody together at the funeral. And there's a really tender scene at the very end where Lenny, Jackie, Lucky's husband, they're just together, and he just puts her arm around her. And I went back and I read that scene, and I just thought, Jackie, you knew this was the grand finale almost of Lucky, and bringing the generations and the younger generation. She loved the younger generation. She'd always say to me, I'm going to do something really funky with Eric or Bobby or Madison. I'm going to take those characters, you know, and she had lots of ideas. She was going to take a character from the Power Trip, Flynn, who was kind of really hunky and whatever, and he had a relatively walk-on part in the Power Trip. She said, I'm going to make him, he's going to be my hero of the next novel. So yeah, so I think you captured that side of her, Laura, which I don't think people would know, because that she had this, but it wasn't like a facade, a pretentious thing. It was just really so she could kind of, you know, be that strong woman.
Oh, thank you. Well, you've answered Elaine's question brilliantly there. Thank you. And Elaine wants to say that she's reading Melanie's latest book, and it's fabulous. And there's a question here from Martin for Melanie. So you mentioned how impressed you were by Jackie's kids and a great reflection on her as a mother. And we've talked about the Robert Kilroy silk scene, but was there any other scene from Laura's film that stood out for you?
Yeah, I saw the movie, the preview, the very first one at the Curzon, and I found it very emotional, and I guess because she had such a public persona, like I mentioned, I met her, I followed her career for years, but I didn't know her, and I don't think most of the world knew her, but that didn't mean that what she showed us wasn't real, and that wasn't all of us, that we didn't see all of her. And I thought that that's what was so amazing about the movies, that I just wasn't expecting the movie to be the way that it was at all. I don't think that I had any idea of the diaries. I hadn't read anything about the diaries. I didn't know they existed. And I didn't think it was salaciously done, the way that the rivalry was explored between the sisters. And I've met Joan several times. And I thought it was just very balanced, and that everybody got a real fair say. I love that. Anyone who hasn't watched it yet will enjoy the best friend scenes, which I won't spoil what that means, but you need to watch it to know what that means. And I just was very emotional when I watched it. I mean, I think I didn't post about it. I mean, we'll post. I mean, tap 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 instantly. Like, I'm here, I'm there. I didn't post about it for like 2 days because I was processing what I'd watched, and really, and I did know, because I was in America, and she'd only ever done. I think she did do one interview, didn't she? Was it with us about the cancer? I think they published it after she died, and I think she had done it, and it had been held back. There was one
with People magazine.
People magazine, yes, People magazine. There was one interview, and I'd read it in America, but strangely, that story hadn't really been told, had it, Laura? It hadn't. That story was not well known, and I'd read that story, and I remember thinking. And the scene in the movie where she says, I think it's Tiffany, says, you're going to be so mad with me about what I've done. And I just was just so sad that, that she could still be here. And that if that had been, and if she'd gone to get that checkup and stuff, and then Joan said the same thing in the movie. And I guess that's the one mystery for me, that I'll not that I'm entitled to know everything, because I can only watch the movies and read the books. But that's the one mystery to me, is that I know that the arc of their story was that there were so many cancer stories in the family that they sort of hid it away, but that such a strong woman, such an amazing woman, such a rounded woman that could raise these amazing daughters and could run this legacy and inspire women like me to change their lives, would fear going to that doctor's appointment, and ultimately try and put it to the back of her mind. I mean, Suzanne, when you found that story out, what did you think about it?
I think that if it had been, say, if I called her and said, Jackie, this is happening, she would say, get to the doctor right now. What do you think you're doing? She would tell everybody, etc. But when it came to stuff, and I have a feeling it's quite typical. I don't know. It's, but I think I could sense when I saw her that time, I knew something wasn't right, because I hugged her at the end of the dinner, and normally, and it was under her wonderful, beautiful cut jacket. She was very thin, and I remember coming home and I just thought there's something. But the idea that she had come to London, made that trip, come over long haul, LA, yeah. London, Heathrow, etc. She would always come to the office to see everybody. And she said there was a message saying she couldn't make it because she sprained her ankle playing football with the grandkids. And I just thought so I think she came, as it said in the film, she came to say goodbye to her closest family, to Tracy, to Joan. I think she probably came to say goodbye to us, but she came to say goodbye to London. And I think what that must have taken physically as well as emotionally, and there's the strength in that. It's sort of almost, but I think I agree, you know, everything is, you know, at her disposal. I'm not saying she could have been necessarily cured, but it could have been caught earlier. But there must have been some block.
Yeah.
And I thought Joan spoke very movingly about that, about going back to her mother, and she'd lost Oscar to cancer.
That's right.
And she'd lost Frank to cancer. And it's sort of, it was almost like a denial. I don't know. You can't take oneself. Or I don't know. It's just, yeah.
What did you think, Laura, about that when you found that out, when you were doing the research and that was there? Because that's the big, apart from everything else, that's the big shock of the movie for people that don't know the story.
I think obviously human beings are complex, and we can never even sometimes ourselves know the truth of what we do in our lives and the decisions we've made. So I think that when it comes to emotions and scars of what you've been through in your own life and the past, and you know, so I think sometimes choices you make aren't even conscious choices in a way. And I think that what the film is trying to show is that, you know, it continues with that idea of Jackie and, you know, the fairy tale life that she was chasing for herself, and the kind of idea of wanting to escape reality. You know, you see it at the very beginning. She goes to Hollywood with her big sister Joan and sees the dream and wants that herself. And so she was always chasing the fantasy. And I think that reality was a hard place for her. She didn't like to look back. She didn't want to be in those dark, difficult spaces. So she kind of trained herself in a way to deny it and to escape into the fantasy world of her characters, escape into her writing, escape into the Hollywood dream. So I think all those things are a part of it, a part of her story, and a part of why that happened to her. You know, that's my sense of it.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Laura, for making this film, and we can revisit and spend time with her through this film. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today and for your questions. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for your reflections. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'd be very grateful if you could fill in a survey, of course. A link is in the chat to help us plan LSE Library events in the future, particularly post-lockdown. We've had a couple of questions about link to watch the film. That link is in the chat. It's also via bookshop.org. So thank you all for joining us so much. I think the event will close in a few minutes. We've neatly very much got to 7:30 there. So thank you very much to our panelists and to LSE for organising this. And thank you, Laura, for this film. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.